The Deathworlder prison complex, known as Fortress Theta, looms ominously on the horizon. It's located on a barren, volcanic planet where temperatures can reach up to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit and the skies are perpetually clouded with toxic ash. The planet's environment is designed to break even the strongest of beings. Fortress Theta is a marvel of security technology, with layers upon layers of energy shields, magnetic barriers, and anti-gravity turrets. It's a place where only the most dangerous beings in the galaxy, Deathworlders, are sent to be contained. Yet the prison's halls are patrolled by humans. Despite the fact that the prisoners have been genetically engineered to survive and thrive in the harshest environments, the humans stand as the sole line of defense. It was a mystery to most. Species across the galaxy, from the stoic Volfar to the towering Galaxians, all questioned the rationale behind this decision. Humans were fragile by comparison. They weren't bred for battle like the Krovians, who could tear through steel with their bare hands, or the Rex, a species with armor-like skin that could shrug off most weaponry. Humans weren't particularly strong, nor were they immune to injury. So why were they entrusted with the task of guarding the deadliest beings in the galaxy? No one had ever truly answered the question, not in public anyway. The only answer that was ever given was that humans had something the other species didn't, a quality that could not be measured in raw strength, intelligence, or resilience. The guards stationed at Fortress Theta, for their part, didn't question it. They had been trained to endure, to adapt, and to survive. The first time most human recruits set foot inside the prison complex, they realized the truth. It was unlike anything they had ever experienced. The air was thick with tension, crackling with the unnatural energy of 1,000 caged beasts, each one an apex predator from some of the galaxy's most hostile planets. Inside the prison's observation deck, a young recruit, Private Lucas Kavanagh, stared at the security monitors. His eyes flitted nervously across the screen, tracking the movements of the Deathworlders in their cells. Each one of them could rip through the thickest walls with ease, and here he was, standing between them and freedom. "Why us?" he murmured to himself, eyes widening as a hulking, serpentine creature on one screen flexed its muscles, effortlessly bending the thick bars of its cell. Sergeant Tessa Shaw, his superior, stepped up beside him, her voice calm but firm. "It's not about strength, Kavanagh. It's about how we think, and how we adapt." She turned to face him, her gaze unshaken as she added, "They can tear down walls, but we can outsmart them. That's why we're here." Lucas nodded, but the unease in his chest didn't fade. He had heard the stories, how humans had survived in situations that would have destroyed any other species, how they were more than just survivors. They were predators in their own right, using intelligence and instinct to conquer the impossible. But would that be enough to survive what was waiting for them? The next day, the recruits are led to the training area, a large, cold, and sterile room filled with complex simulations and combat exercises designed to push their physical and mental limits. Private Lucas Kavanagh stood among his fellow recruits, feeling the weight of his uncertainty press down on him like a storm cloud. The air hummed with the low thrum of energy shields, and the walls were lined with holographic projectors, ready to throw them into the most dangerous scenarios imaginable. Sergeant Tessa Shaw stood before them, her face as impassive as ever. She didn't need to say much. Her presence alone demanded respect. "Your task is simple," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the murmur of anticipation. "Survive, adapt, and remember, there is no one coming to save you." The recruits knew what she meant. In this job, there were no backup teams, no emergency response crews. If you failed, you were on your own. If you died, you were forgotten. Survival was a personal responsibility, and the stakes were life and death. The first simulation was brutal. The holograms materialized around them. A Deathworlder had escaped its cell. A massive, hulking creature, something between a reptile and an insect, crashed through the simulated environment with terrifying force. Its razor-sharp claws tore through walls, and its screeches rattled the recruits to their core. Lucas froze at first, unsure of how to react. The creature's movements were unpredictable, chaotic, and deadly. Most of the recruits fell back instinctively, trying to hide behind cover or figure out a way to neutralize the threat. But Sergeant Shaw wasn't like the others. She moved without hesitation, taking control of the situation. "Remember," she shouted over the roar of the creature, "don't try to overpower it. Think like a human. Adapt." Shaw didn't engage the creature head-on. Instead, she used the environment, leading it through narrow corridors where its size was a disadvantage. She lured it into a trap, using clever distractions to keep it off balance, buying time for the recruits to regroup. Lucas watched in awe as Shaw led the creature into a dead-end chamber, where the floor opened beneath it, sending the beast plummeting into a containment pit. The entire exercise lasted only minutes, but it was a brutal demonstration of the fundamental lesson they needed to learn. Overpowering a Deathworlder wasn't the key to survival. Outwitting it, staying one step ahead, was. The recruits were panting, adrenaline pumping, their hearts racing from the sheer intensity of the simulation. Lucas wiped the sweat from his brow, still trying to process what had just happened. He felt a cold weight in his stomach. "How do you know where it's going?" he asked Shaw, still struggling to catch his breath. Shaw's gaze met his, a glint of something unreadable in her eyes. "Because I've seen it before, Kavanagh. These creatures, they think they're in control, but they're predictable. It's all about learning how to see what they'll do next." Lucas absorbed her words, realizing that Shaw wasn't just talking about the creature. She was talking about the job, about life in this hellhole of a prison. It wasn't about being the strongest or the toughest. It was about being human. As the days passed, Lucas began to feel the oppressive weight of the prison settling around him. He had learned the basics, how to survive the chaos, how to think like a human, and how to keep his wits sharp. But there was still so much he didn't know, so much he had yet to experience. It wasn't just about surviving in the training simulations. It was about the real thing. It was about the Deathworlders. The first time Lucas came face to face with a real Deathworlder, it was nothing like the sterile simulations. He stood in the observation deck, staring at the creature trapped in its reinforced containment cell. The Rex, half-armored predator, half-psychic monstrosity, was a species born to kill. Its body was a towering mass of muscle and exoskeleton, with two long muscular arms ending in razor-sharp claws. Its head was a grotesque amalgamation of insectoid and reptilian features, its eyes gleaming with an intelligence that seemed almost human, yet unsettling. Lucas could feel its gaze through the thick glass, the way its unblinking eyes followed his every movement. It was a reminder that he was standing on the edge of a razor-thin line between life and death. The Rix could feel his fear, his unease, and it was enjoying it. "We're not in a simulation anymore, Kavanagh." Sergeant Shaw's voice cut through his thoughts, firm and cold. "This thing could tear you apart in seconds. It's faster than you, stronger than you, and it will never stop hunting you." Lucas swallowed hard. He had heard the stories about the Deathworlders, the things they could do, the way they adapted to the harshest environments, the way they thrived on violence and destruction. But being so close to one, feeling the pulse of its presence, was an entirely different experience. He could feel the tension building in the room, the unnatural stillness of the creature, waiting. "Why don't we just kill it?" he asked, trying to make sense of the question that had been gnawing at him. "Why are we keeping them alive? These things are monsters." Shaw's gaze softened, but her tone remained unwavering. "We don't kill them, Kavanagh, because they're valuable. Dangerous, yes, but valuable. The galaxy uses them for their strength, their resilience. But the truth is, they aren't invincible. They're just a product of their environment. Their instincts make them powerful, but those instincts are predictable." She pointed toward the Rex, whose claws scraped impatiently against the steel bars of its cell. "We study them, we understand them, and we learn how to control them. That's why we're here. Not to fight them head-on, but to outsmart them." Lucas stared at the Ricks, a new understanding settling in. It wasn't just about surviving the Deathworlders. It was about knowing them better than they knew themselves. The galaxy feared these creatures, but perhaps humanity's true power lay in their ability to adapt to this brutal world, no matter how deadly the challenge. The weeks that followed were a blur of training exercises, simulations, and tense encounters with the prison's most dangerous inmates. Lucas' understanding of his role as a guard continued to evolve, but there was still one question that gnawed at him. Why were humans the only species capable of managing these monsters? It wasn't until late one evening, after a particularly grueling training session, that Surgeon Shaw sat down with Lucas and a few of the other recruits for a private briefing. The atmosphere was different from their usual sessions. The flickering lights of the conference room gave off a muted glow, and the low hum of the facility's engines could be heard in the background. Shaw's expression was serious, almost grave. "This isn't just about being strong," she began, her voice low but firm. "And it's not just about being smart either." The recruits exchanged curious glances. Lucas leaned forward, trying to catch every word. Shaw continued, "Humans have a unique ability. It's not something we talk about openly, but it's the core reason why we guard the Deathworlders. We have something that no other species has, something inherent to our biology and psychology. We don't just survive these environments. We learn from them. We adapt in ways other species can't." Lucas blinked. "What do you mean, adapt?" Shaw stood and began to pace, her steps echoing in the room. "Take the Deathworlders you've seen. Each species is a product of its environment. The Ricks are tough because their home planet is full of constant seismic activity, harsh weather, and dangerous wildlife. They've evolved to withstand this brutal world by being stronger, more resilient. But here's the thing. They only have one mode of survival: fight. It's all they know." The recruits listened intently, each one on the edge of their seat. Shaw paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "Humans don't work that way. We don't just fight to survive. We change to survive. It's not about being bigger or stronger. It's about being more flexible, more capable of learning. Humans can make choices, adjust to new threats, and shift strategies in ways no other species can. When you're dealing with a Rix or a Crovy, they are predictable because they are bound by instinct. But us," she smiled faintly, "we're unpredictable. That's our advantage." Lucas was beginning to understand. It wasn't just about brute strength. It was about how humans could learn, adapt, and innovate in the face of unimaginable odds. This ability made humans more than just survivors. It made them potential masters of chaos, able to outmaneuver even the deadliest creatures in the galaxy. "That's why we're here," Shaw continued. "We're not just guards. We're researchers. We learn everything we can about the Deathworlders. Their movements, their behaviors, their psychology. We study them like the predators they are, and we find their weaknesses." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. "And you think, we can control them?" Shaw nodded. "Not control, but we can survive. And sometimes, survival is all we need." It was the dead of night when it happened. The alarm pierced the quiet, a high-pitched screech that jolted Lucas awake from a fitful sleep. His heart raced as the sound continued, reverberating through the thick walls of the prison. He jumped out of bed, pulling on his uniform with mechanical precision. His mind raced with only one thought. This is it. The moment I've been dreading. The breakout had come. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the facility into darkness. Panic surged through the recruits as they scrambled to prepare, but Shaw's voice cut through the chaos. Listen up. This is what you've been trained for. Stay calm. Think clear. No one gets out alive unless we say so. Move out. Lucas' breath hitched as he followed Shaw and the others into the central command room. He could already hear the frantic calls coming over the comms, voices filled with fear and urgency. Reports of multiple Deathworlders breaching containment, breaking through the reinforced walls of their cells with terrifying ease. It was happening faster than anyone had anticipated. "Grashak's out," Shaw said grimly, her voice barely audible over the noise. "And we have a full breach in Sector 12. Lucas' stomach twisted. Grashak. The name was enough to send chills down anyone's spine. Grashak was one of the deadliest creatures housed in Fortress Theta, an apex predator from a planet with storms so violent they could strip the flesh off a being in seconds. Its sheer size and brute strength made it a walking nightmare. "Where's the containment team?" another recruit asked, panic creeping into his voice. "They're down. All of them," Shaw replied, her tone unflinching. "We're on our own now." Lucas felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. They were human. They were only human, and they were facing creatures that could rip them apart with a single swipe. "Move out," Shaw ordered, and they were off. They ran through the dimly lit hallways, the low hum of the prison's emergency lights casting an eerie glow. As they passed through the corridors, Lucas could hear the distant growls and roars of the Deathworlders. The beast's feral cries reverberated off the walls, sending shivers down his spine. Then they reached Sector 12. The walls were cracked, torn open as if the very foundation of the prison had been ripped apart. The metal doors hung crookedly, barely hanging on their hinges. The place looked like a war zone, an apocalyptic scene of destruction and chaos. "Position," Shaw barked. "Get in formation." Lucas took his place at the back of the group, his mind racing. The Deathworlders were never supposed to be able to breach the facility. It was meant to be inescapable, but the impossible had happened. Grashak was free, and with it, every other inmate was beginning to follow. Shaw keyed in a sequence on her wrist communicator, locking down the inner door leading to the containment cell blocks. But even as she did, Lucas could hear the rumble of something massive moving toward them. And then he saw it. Grashak. The massive scaled beast lumbered forward through the hallway, its eyes glowing with primal rage. It was everything the legends had described, and more. The creature moved with a calculated fury, its muscles rippling under its armored hide, and Lucas realized with cold clarity, they were facing something that couldn't be fought head-on. Shaw's voice rang out. "Remember what I told you. Stay calm. Adapt." The hallway seemed to stretch on forever as Lucas stared at Grashak, the massive creature moving toward them with deliberate, terrifying steps. Its thick, scale-covered body rippled with every motion, and its eyes burned with an unnatural intelligence, gleaming with a bloodlust that made Lucas's stomach churn. The ground trembled with each step it took, the claws on its feet scraping against the metal floor like the sound of thunder. Shaw stood tall, her expression unreadable, but her hands were steady as she adjusted her wrist communicator, her voice cool, as she gave instructions to the team. "Don't engage it directly. We'll use the corridors and traps. Kavanagh, you're with me. Stay sharp." Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. This is real. This isn't a drill. He nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he readied his stun rifle. The weapon wasn't nearly powerful enough to kill Grashak. Nothing they had could. But it might be able to slow it down, at least buy them enough time to outmaneuver it. He had to remember Shaw's lessons. Think like a human. Adapt. They moved quickly but cautiously down the corridor, their footsteps echoing in the silence that hung heavy around them. Every shadow felt like a potential ambush. Every corner could be hiding a new threat. They rounded a bend, and suddenly the ground beneath them shifted. Grashak's hulking form came into view, moving with an eerie, predatory grace. It saw them instantly, its eyes locking onto Shaw and Lucas. With a roar, the beast charged, its massive jaws snapping as it surged forward with terrifying speed. Lucas barely had time to react before Shaw grabbed his arm and yanked him to the side, pulling him into a narrow side hallway. "Stay with me," Shaw shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Move fast. Get to the junction. Now." The sound of Grashek's claws skittering across the metal floor grew louder, like a freight train barreling toward them. Lucas's breath came in short gasps as he ran, adrenaline flooding his system. His mind raced, running through every strategy Shaw had drilled into them, but he couldn't help but feel the crushing weight of their situation. The junction ahead was their only chance. If they could reach it, they could trigger the electromagnetic barriers that would lock down the section and force Grashek into a containment room. It was risky, but it was the only hope they had. They reached the junction, and Shaw immediately began inputting a series of commands into the terminal. Lucas's fingers fumbled with the controls, his hands slick with sweat. Come on, Shaw muttered under her breath, her eyes scanning the hallway for any signs of movement. Just as the final command was entered, the floor beneath them shook violently, and Lucas whipped around to see Grashek charging at them, its jaws snapping, its massive body a blur of muscle and fury. Now, Shaw shouted. Lucas slammed his palm against the control panel, and with a hum, the electromagnetic barriers activated, sending a bright blue force field zipping across the corridor. Grashek slammed into the barrier with a deafening crash, its body rattling against the invisible wall. The creature howled in frustration, its claws scraping against the energy field, but it couldn't break through. For the moment, they were safe. Lucas exhaled sharply, his entire body trembling with the aftermath of the adrenaline rush. That was too close, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Shaw didn't look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on the beast, still thrashing against the barrier. It's not over yet, Kavanagh. This is just the beginning. The electromagnetic barrier flickered, its humming energy field crackling as Grashek slammed into it again. The force of the impact sent vibrations through the ground, but the barrier held. For now, they were safe. Lucas watched in a kind of stunned silence. The image of the enraged beast thrashing against the invisible wall burned into his mind. But Shaw didn't waste a moment. Her hand shot out, grabbing his arm and pulling him away from the barrier. Move, Kavanagh, she barked, her voice sharp and urgent. We don't have much time. The breach is just beginning. Get to the control room and re-secure the facility. Lucas snapped out of his stupor and followed her, his legs moving instinctively. He had seen the creature's power firsthand. Even with the electromagnetic barrier holding it back, Grashek was only one part of the problem. There were dozens of other Deathworlders out there, dozens of creatures just as deadly, if not more. As they ran through the hallways, the sounds of chaos filled the air. Screams of guards and the roars of monstrous inmates as they tore through the prison. The staccato sound of blaster fire and the crashing of metal could be heard from every direction. They had reached the heart of Fortress Theta, and it was in full, violent upheaval. How did this happen? Lucas gasped, trying to keep up with Shaw's brisk pace. How did they breach the outer defenses? This place is impenetrable. Shaw's face hardened, and for the first time, Lucas saw a crack in her calm exterior. This was no accident, she said, her voice low but filled with a bitter edge. We've been compromised. They reached the control room, and Shaw immediately keyed in the access code, but the screen flashed red. Access denied. Damn it. Shaw cursed under her breath. They'd locked us out. Whoever is behind this breach knows the systems better than anyone else. Someone on the inside is working with the Deathworlders. Lucas froze, his mind racing. You mean, someone here is helping them? Shaw nodded grimly. Exactly. They'd found a way to disable the lockdown protocols, bypass the security codes, and release the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. Whoever's behind this knows how to exploit the prison systems. We're dealing with more than just a prison riot. We're facing sabotage on a scale we've never seen. Lucas's stomach churned. The thought of someone betraying them from within was almost too much to grasp. How had they gotten this far? How had the system failed? Where's the backup team? Lucas asked, his voice shaking. Where's the cavalry? There is no backup, Shaw replied harshly. "We are the backup." Before Lucas could respond, the wall behind them exploded with a deafening crash. Grashak had broken through the barrier. The massive creature emerged from the smoke and rubble, its claws slashing through the air as it roared, sending a wave of terror through Lucas's chest. But this time, they weren't in the clear. The creature had adapted. It was coming for them. Shaw raised her weapon, her eyes narrowed. "Get to the secondary control station. Now." Lucas hesitated only for a moment. Then he followed, knowing the ground beneath Lucas's feet shook as Grashak barreled through the destroyed walls, its colossal form emerging from the smoke, teeth bared, eyes wild with unrelenting fury. Shaw didn't hesitate. She fired a barrage of stun rounds into the beast's chest, but the creature barely flinched, its thick armor resisting the impact. It snarled, its massive claws slashing the air, inches from their faces. "We can't stop it with what we have," Shaw shouted, the desperation evident in her voice. "We need to fall back." Lucas's heart hammered in his chest. The adrenaline coursed through him, but his mind was racing, trying to find an answer. The electromagnetic barriers had failed. Their weapons weren't strong enough. He looked at Shaw, and for a split second, he saw something in her eyes, a glimmer of realization. Then, without warning, Shaw grabbed him by the arm and pulled him into a nearby maintenance hatch. The door slammed shut behind them, and they descended rapidly through the dark, narrow tunnels beneath the prison. The air was thick with the smell of dust and rust, but it was their only option. Above them, the sounds of Grashak's roars echoed through the prison. "Where are we going?" Lucas asked, his voice barely a whisper as they moved deeper into the bowels of the facility. "To the core," Shaw answered. "It's the heart of Fortress Theta. If we can access the main override system, we can trigger the facility's self-destruct sequence. We'll take down the entire prison and everyone in it." Lucas's stomach turned. The thought of destroying the entire facility, sacrificing everyone inside, including the prisoners, felt wrong. But there was no choice. They couldn't let the Deathworlders, or whoever was behind this, escape. Not when humanity's survival was at stake. They reached the core chamber, a massive room filled with glowing consoles and humming machinery. Shaw immediately set to work, her hands flying over the controls. Lucas kept watch, his pulse racing as he heard the distant thuds of Grashak's footsteps, growing closer with each passing second. Time was running out. "Come on," Shaw muttered, sweat trickling down her brow. "Come on." Lucas's eyes darted around the room, the tension mounting with every second. He knew that once Shaw initiated the self-destruct, there would be no turning back. The countdown would begin, and the prison would be obliterated, along with any hope of capturing the Deathworlders or stopping the betrayal from within. Then, just as Grashak's massive form appeared in the doorway, Shaw slammed her fist down on the final key. The system began to hum, the countdown clock flashing on the central monitor. "Self-destruct sequence initiated," the computer voice droned. 10 minutes until detonation. "Let's go," Shaw shouted, already moving toward the exit. They ran through the tunnels, the sound of Grashak's enraged roars echoing behind them. They didn't look back. There was no time. As they made their way toward the surface, Lucas's mind was clouded with questions. Who had betrayed them? How deep did the conspiracy go? But there was no time to find answers now. With the self-destruct countdown ticking down and the chaos of the prison collapsing around them, they burst out into the open air just as the ground trembled beneath them. The last thing Lucas saw before the explosion engulfed the prison was Shaw's determined face. They had done what they could. Now, the galaxy would have to rebuild.